Okay, she's going live.
Okay. Everything okay?
Uh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Looks like we have a problem.
What happened? What happened?
Wait.
Annie, I'm just going to charge my laptop so you will not see me on screen, okay?
Yes, okay, Miss Norris. Good morning, Pak Widya and Mr. Narit. Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
I think I see Pak Widya's camera is on already. Can we check with your microphone, Pak Widya? I cannot hear you, Pak. Sawadika. Still cannot hear you. I think you're already unmute, but perhaps something with the microphone.
Masuk. Cek, cek. Oh, udah masuk. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but very small. Jeng, jeng. Kok last working day Mas 2 Oktober sih? Kok last working day Mas 2
Cek,
Oktober?
cek. Dah. Cek 1, 2, 1.
Yes, can hear Pak. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but is my voice you can hear clearly?
Not very clear. But it's better than before.
What about this microphone? Is it clear?
Still not very clear, Pak. Possible to increase the volume, perhaps?
Check 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, Pak. I think it's better now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Pak Widya, just to run you through our program today. Okay, I think we have Mr. Naret, so we can just go through together. Good morning, Naret. Can we check with your audio? Naret, can we check with your audio? I think you're still mute.
Annie, I think Mr. Nari, the backdrop itself is not really working. Can I ask, is Mr. Nari using tablet, iPad, or laptop?
Yes, I can hear you, but the sound is it's not good. Just a moment, I will try to adjust my computer. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you now.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Pak Widya dan Mr. Naret, I just want to run you through our program today. So, we will start with around 9:50, I think in 7 minutes, just to allow some participants to join in our Zoom webinar in the room. And also we are going to be, this webinar will be live streamed in YouTube as well. And from ESSEC, it will be me to open the webinar just to share some housekeepings with our participants on how they can share their comments or questions, if any. And after that, I will hand it over to Mr. Andrew Gan, already in here. Mr. Andrew will be sharing a keynote speech as a welcoming remark for our webinar. And then we will move to the second session of our webinar today, which is the key presentations. The order for the presentation, we will start from Pak Widya, from the RO chapter. Pak Widya, do you want me to do the share screen of the PPT, or would you prefer to do it from your end?
Maybe I will share screen by myself.
Oh, okay. Would you like to try to share screen now, just in case?
Okay, give me just 2 minutes.
Yep. Then while waiting, after Pak Widya, the presentation will be followed by Mr. Narit on the STRACAP. And our last key presenter will be Miss Liz. And after that, I will hand it over to Miss Presti. She will be our moderator. I think Miss Presti is already here in the room. Yeah, there she is. So Miss Presti, Miss Presti will be our moderator today, and she will lead the panel discussion. Unfortunately, for our panel discussion session, we were supposed to have 2 discussions today, but one of them from the cosmetic sector, unfortunately, has got COVID and will not be able to join us today. And in that regard, I would like to invite all of our speakers, if possible, to stay until the panel discussion session and to join the discussion with our panelists, Dr. Kaur, later on, and also to join in the Q&A sessions, and possibly to also address some of the questions when if it is relevant with your background. And following that will be we will just close the sessions after that. And if there is any follow-up questions, we can just forward them to each of the speakers. Yeah, I think I can see the PPT very clear from here. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Pak Widya. I think that's all from my end. Is there any questions? Oh, yeah, we have Dr. Kaur joining us. Good morning, Dr. Kaur.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, I just went through the program with everyone just now, but just to introduce you to Miss Presti, our moderator today. She will lead the discussion, and just to inform you, the panel discussion session is supposed to be you and another panelist will be our representative from Korean cosmetics company, Jayon GA, Miss Monsuk. Unfortunately, she won't be able to join because of COVID. And so during that session, you will be joined by our other speakers that will give key presentations on the first session. Yeah, and after
Absolutely. Thank you,
that,
Anirama.
yep. And after that, we will have a Q&A session. I think that's it for me. But Presti, do you have anything that you would like to inform before we start the webinar?
Just
Yeah, please, Dr. Cora.
thank you, Presti, if I may, and thank you, Anirama, as well. Unfortunately, I can only stay until 11:30 a.m. Jakarta time, which is 12:30 p.m. Malaysia time. I'm very sorry for this because I have another meeting that I have to attend. I hope that's okay with everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, we are aware of that, and we are okay with that. Yeah, so I think with the absence of Miss Suk from Korea, I think we can merge the discussion panel session with Q&A session, so we can have all the speakers and panelists involved to answer some questions.
Sorry, Presti, I think there is echo from your end.
Check. Check. Can you hear me?
Yes, now better.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I think it will be a more engaging session if we have all the panelists and speakers to involved in answering questions after the key presentation sessions. So all the 4 panelists and all the 4 presenter and panelists can just jump in to answer some questions we have. Will that be all right? Yeah, I think that is all from our end. And if there is any difficulties later on, feel free to private chat me from through the chat section through Zoom, or you can just WhatsApp me. I think I already shared my WhatsApp number. And yeah, we're just waiting a few more minutes, and then after that, we will start the webinar. Thank you, everyone. Okay, everyone, we will start accepting our participants now, and after that, we will start the webinar officially. Thank you.
Hi, Ani, just testing the mic. Is the audio okay?
Yep. Oh, okay.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Pak.
Welcome everyone to the third round of the webinar series on unlocking RCEP for business, organized by the ASEAN Secretariat and East Asia Business Council. Thank you for everyone who are joining from Zoom and from YouTube channel. Today we will be looking into pharmaceutical and cosmetics industry. We will have presentations from key experts and former negotiators on relevant chapters from RCEP Agreement and its implication for business in the pharmaceutical and cosmetic sector. Following that, we will have a panel discussion to hear more on the industry insights on the RCEP Agreement, followed by a Q&A session. However, it is with regret that we inform everyone that one of our panelists, Ms. Ban Myung-suk, CEO of Jaeonjie Korean Cosmetics Company, as the representative of Korea International Trade Associations, or KITA, will not be able to join us today because of unprecedented event. And just to share some housekeepings to everyone, participants' video and audio has been disabled. However, we encourage you to drop your questions in the Zoom chat box or the Q&A button that you can find at the bottom of your screen. And if you're joining from YouTube, you can just submit your questions or comments in the comment sections on your right-hand side. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Andrew Gunn, the president of the Cosmetic, Toiletry and Fragrance Association Singapore, and past president and lifetime honorary member of Society of Cosmetic Scientists Singapore. For over a decade, Mr. Andrew has taught innovation, packaging, product design, and development as a young lecturer. He drew on his interdisciplinary background and experience of over 3 decades in the personal care, cosmetics, and medical device industry. Without further ado, you may have the screen, Andrew.
Thank you, Ms. Ani. Very good morning, distinguished guests, speakers, and all participants. I thank the organizers, ASEAN Secretariat, and the EABC for inviting me. First of all, on behalf of Ms. Li Pang, President of the ASEAN Cosmetic Association, she's the one who assigned this honor and privilege for me to represent ACA this morning. So let me briefly say that ACA is the representative of the cosmetic and personal care industry, comprising 7 members from ASEAN. Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam. And we have 7 associate members from Australia, Japan, Korea, USA, China, Cosmetics Europe, IFRA, and the CTFAS, or the Cosmetic Toiletry and Fragrance Association of Singapore, is a founding member of ACA. We are the Singapore's Industry Trade Association for marketeers, producers, and stakeholders. As you probably know, Singapore has been called the easiest place to do business. And we gladly welcome you to visit Singapore this coming November to join CTFA talks at this year's Cosmoprof Asia. Next, let me just give a brief sketch of what is a cosmetic. The ASEAN Cosmetic Directive defines a cosmetic product to mean any substance or preparation intended to be placed in contact with the various external parts of the human body: epidermis, hair system, nails, lips, external genital organs, or with the teeth and the mucous membranes of the oral cavity, with a view exclusively or mainly for cleaning them, perfuming them, changing their appearance, and or correcting body odors, and or protecting or keeping them in good condition. So this definition would roughly cover the likes of HS codes 3303 to 3401 and so on, but it excludes medicinal and pharmaceutical products. There is a general consensus that cosmetic and personal care products promote people's well-being and are therefore a necessary part of our lives. Interestingly, consumers of personal care goods have 4 general expectations: that cosmetics should be innovative, up-to-date or trendy, fit for purpose and function, and lastly, they should all be safe. Therefore, given these expectations that are growing higher and higher, timely market access is critical for both producers and consumers alike. Next, let me touch a little bit on the market size and the potential. The personal care and cosmetic sector is a quiet but steady driver of value within the respective economies of the region. The cosmetic market size of ASEAN is approximately 23 billion USD. Interestingly, the combined market size of the other 5 countries is 5 times that of ASEAN's, totaling about 106 billion USD. According to Statista, the cosmetic market in RCEP countries is about 130 billion US dollars, making up over 30% of the total global cosmetic market. And growth over the years to 2026 is expected to be 6.4%. Now, in 2014, my distinguished predecessor and mentor, Dr. Alan Kayat, endorsed a position paper together with the national associations of Australia, New Zealand, Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines, that the RCEP presents an extraordinary opportunity to facilitate international trade of cosmetics. We were convinced RCEP would benefit the industry as well as the consumers. Therefore, we've also stated that the facilitation of international trade and cooperation is critical for the personal care industry. It thrives where markets are open and transparent, where regulatory environments are consistent, where playing fields are level, where strong demand drives growth in the industry value chain, all the way from ingredients, product development, to manufacturing, packaging, retail, e-commerce, transportation, and so on, creating millions of jobs across all functions. And these jobs include jobs in R&D, educational, as well as training institutions. The points of concern raised then, and continues to be of interest for our industry, would be the following. One, a common definition for cosmetics and personal care products helps to align all the country signatories. Two, deferring national regulations increase the burden of doing business for the industry. Three, regulatory alignment advances the interests of consumers who benefit from products that are innovative and safe. Four, cosmetics and personal care products present very low risks to consumer health and safety. Therefore, five, risk-based regulations appropriate to the industry benefits both consumers and producers. Six, manufacturers play a pivotal and responsible role, assuring quality and safety. And seven, in-market surveillance and enforcement is an effective means of control. Eight, products which have undergone assessments and tests based on sound science should not be required to undergo retesting or re-evaluation. Nine, manufacturers' declaration of conformity by both producers of ingredients and finished products is a positive step to reduce resources and costs. 10, labeling should provide consumers with meaningful information to allow them to make an informed decision. 11, international cosmetic GMP and ISO standards should be recognized and accepted. And finally, regulatory coherence in the context of GRP facilitates seamless interface of country-to-country regulatory systems. And incidentally, the ASEAN Good Regulatory Practice Guide provides a checklist for regulators to assist in the preparation and adoption of efficient regulatory arrangements that would improve the consistency and transparency of technical regulations, thereby reducing technical barriers to trade. Provided that the NTMs and the TBTs continue to be addressed, RCEP offers opportunities in terms of new preferential markets, cost savings, and optimization of supply chain. And specifically, these 2 points. A, improved business environment, where there are provisions to increase the security and trust in e-commerce, protection for intellectual property, including anti-counterfeiting, and strong support for SMEs, as well as the SMEs. This offers immense opportunities for startups with innovative cosmetic formulations and business models. And lastly, improve access to the markets of China, Japan, and Korea, the top 3 cosmetic powerhouses in Asia. These 3 countries combined represent 24% of the world's economy. They are Asia's top producers of cosmetic packaging and ingredients. And small and large cosmetic companies can therefore take advantage of RCEP's ROO, perhaps versus ASEAN +1 requirements for preferential treatment under RCEP. And with that, I wish all of you a very productive webinar. Thank you. Over to
Thank you.
Dani.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Moving on to our next session, it will be a key presentations of RCEP relevant chapters on pharma and cosmetics industry from our experts and former negotiator. For our first presenter, I would like to invite Pak Widya Aryadi, Head of Customs Clearance Section from Customs and Excise Prime Office of Soekarno-Hatta, Indonesia. Previously, Pak Widya has been involved in numerous ASEAN FTAs negotiations such as ASEAN-China, ASEAN-Hong Kong, and RCEP. Pak Widya will be presenting the RO aspects of the RCEP agreement for pharma and cosmetic sector. I hand over the screen to you, Pak Widya. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Ani. Okay, I hope everybody could hear my voice clearly. So, Excellencies, honorable experts, speaker, guests, all participants, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. I hope everybody in a good and very healthy condition today. First of all, I would like to address my sincere gratitude and appreciation for having invited me in this valuable webinar to share my views on RCEP rules of origin and how it could help facilitating specific industries, in this case, pharmaceutical and cosmetic industry. Just for disclaimer, unfortunately, I'm not a chemist, so I'm sorry for not being able to make example cases of rules of origin using the cases in the production of pharmaceutical or cosmetic products. And realizing that rules of origin is very technical topics, so let me just try to give a brief and simple explanation on how a product could acquire originating status and finally gain preferential treatment in the RCEP importing party. Move to slide 1. Okay, as you might be aware that the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is a free trade agreement. We often call it a mega FTA between 10 member states of ASEAN and its 5 FTA partners. So before we have ASEAN +1 FTAs such as ASEAN China, ASEAN India, ASEAN Korea, ASEAN Australia, New Zealand, ASEAN Japan, etc. Now RCEP tries to consolidate all the existing ASEAN +1 FTAs, hoping to harmonize all the rules, creating wider markets as well as establishing a more effective and efficient elimination of tariff and non-tariff barriers for trade in the region. Next. This is just to look back at the theory that the international trade is very beneficial for either for the producer and the consumer. For the consumer, it could achieve the economic scale through product specialization. It could expand the market access and to make raw materials or components and capital goods available in a more competitive price and quantity. While for consumer, the consumer goods are available in a more competitive price and various quality. And the free trade area provide more efficient and effective elimination of tariff and non-tariff barriers to facilitate the trades. Next. This is just the scope of the FTA. Normally, there are 3 areas negotiated during the FTA negotiation, including RCEP, and they are the trade in goods, trade in service, and investment. So if we speak about the rules of origins, rules of origin is under the scope of trade in goods. So rules of origin is a set of rules to determine the origin of goods. And why it is very important? Because only the goods originating from the FTA parties, in this case RCEP parties, that would gain the preferential treatment from the importing party. Next. In RCEP agreement, there is a specific chapter that governs the rules of origin. That is chapter 3. And under the chapter of rules of origin, there are 2 sections. Section A is about the rules of origin, 15 articles, containing rules and guidelines on how a good could acquire originating status in RCEP scheme. And section B, the operational certification procedures, 20 articles, containing rules and guidelines on how an originating good could gain preferential tariff in the importing RCEP party. So the RCEP rules of origin aim at streamlining ASEAN + 1 FTA rules. It integrated different rules from the existing ASEAN + 1 FTA. And so it's expected to have a set of common rules of origin among 15 parties that would help boosting the creation of an integrated market in the region. The RCEP rules of origin also upgrades the existing ASEAN + 1 FTA rules, as it commits for a more comprehensive, facilitative, and understandable FTA by considering the development of modern practice on the current international trade. Next. So this is the structure of RCEP rules of origin. It is generally in other ASEAN + 1 FTAs, the rules of origin also have 3 criteria to be complied for the goods to have preferential treatment in the importing party. There are origin criteria, consignment criteria, and procedural provisions. The origin criteria, this first is very important. This is for the producer of the goods, how the producer could acquire the originating status. They have 3 options of criteria. The first is wholly obtained. It means that the goods must be produced using all inputs and materials from one country or one party. While for PE, produced exclusively, the goods must be produced using all originating materials from other parties. And the PSR is a list of goods, of the whole goods traded in RCEP, and the substantial transformation that must be complied for the goods to get the originating status. Next. This is the wholly obtained or produced. As I mentioned before, that in wholly obtained, the product must be produced using all inputs and materials from one party. But this is the list of goods that also could be recognized as wholly obtained, like plants and plant goods, live animals, goods obtained from live animals, etc. You can read the list afterward, including the waste and scrap derived from the production of the consumption and used goods collected there. Yeah, and also the goods obtained and produced there solely from the goods referred to subparagraph A to G. Next, this is the produced exclusively criteria. As I mentioned before, that the goods must be produced using all originating materials from other party, as the illustration here. Philippines produce a toy car, a tuk-tuk, using materials from Thailand, Singapore, and Australia. They are all originating. What's the difference between the RVC criteria and produce exclusively? For the RVC, you have to calculate all the value of the materials used in the production of the goods. So the originating materials imported from RCEP parties must be covered by proof of origin, for example, the certificate of origin, and they are all must constitute not less than 40% of the value of the final products in FOB terms. But while for the PE, it is sufficient for you to have to prove that all materials is originating from other parties. Then you will obtain the originating status with PE criteria. Just one attention here that while using the produce exclusively criteria, we must consider about the tariff differential if the goods is the goods or the material is subject to tariff differential. So what is tariff differential? Is the that is the different tariff treatment that an importing party applies for the same originating goods. So far, the RCEP parties have tariff differential Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and for AFP is China, Japan, and Korea. As the applicable tariff rate for the goods subject to tariff differential differs by party where the final goods acquire originating status, this would create opportunities for circumvention. So this we have to be careful. For example, a product from country A is exported to country B, and the tariff rate applied is 15%. So the country A would send it first to country C, because the country B applies tariff 0 to 5% to all products of country B. That is the circumvention. So the RCEP rules of origin chapter have specific provision to govern for the treatment of goods subject to tariff differential. Next. This is the product specific rules. So this is the list, as I mentioned before, the list of all products according to the HS code. And at the right columns, there is the specific rules that must be complied. For example, tariff line 2915, sodium hydroxide. Yeah, the specific rule is CTSH, except from subheading, etc., etc. Yeah, there is a specific rules that must be complied. There are applicable rules like wholly obtained, regional value content, 40%, and change in tariff classification. It could be change in chapter, change in tariff heading or subheading, or specific process. in RCEP rules of origin, there is another criteria for acquiring originating status, that is a specific process, the chemical process rules. So, for example, on the lower right, you have 2902 cyclic hydrocarbons. There is optional rules that you can take. It is CTH, RVC40, or CR. CR is a chemical reaction. The chemical reaction is a process including biochemical process, which results in a molecule with a new structure by breaking intramolecular bonds and by forming new intramolecular bonds, or by altering the spatial arrangements of atom in a molecule. There is some reaction that is not considered to be chemical reaction. They are dissolving in water or other solvents, the elimination of solvent, including solvent water, or the addition of or elimination of water crystallization. Next. Accumulation. So RCEP as a mega FTA provides wider source for material accumulations. So for a RCEP party to produce a product, could accumulate the materials, the originating materials from other party. Like the illustration here, Indonesia produce a bicycle. It accumulates the materials imported from Vietnam. That must be originating. The final products then entitled for the originating status and sent to Australia. So when RCEP have 15 members, then so the source for the materials for accumulation will be wider. And the next type, RCEP opened the possibility to apply full accumulation, where RCEP parties could accumulate production process undertaken in other RCEP parties. Next. For the proof of origin, it's very important because it's the proof that your product is originating. In RCEP, we have now 3 kinds of proof of origin. The first is conventional certificate of origin, and then declaration of origin by approved exporter, and declaration of origin by any exporter or producer. For declaration of origin by any exporter or producer, now you can enter into force only applied by Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. And for CLM, we'll implement it in the next 20 years. And for other countries, have a 10 years transition period. For the next step, we will discuss on the possibility to implement the declaration of origin by importer and also electronic certificate of origin. Next. What is a proof exporter? So a proof exporter is exporter that is grant the authorization from a government to issue the self-certificate by their own. So in this case, in RCEP, they do not issue a kind of certificate, but they just declare the origin on the commercial documents such as invoice, bill of lading, packing list, or other non-commercial documents like a company letterhead. But it must contain all information as mentioned in Annex 3B, the minimum information requirement. And to have the authorization from government, the exporter must apply in writing or electronically. Exporter must offer all guarantees necessary to verify the originating status, and they must be registered, and they have to know and understand very well rules of origin, especially the RCEP rules of origin. And they have a satisfactory level of experience in export and has a good record of compliance. For trader, they must obtain a declaration by the producer confirming the origin status, and the producers and traders must well maintain the bookkeeping and record keeping system. Next, I think this is the last slide. So how customs verify the origin of the goods for the purpose of determining whether a good imported into one party from another party qualifies as an originating goods. The competent authority in Indonesia is customs, may conduct a verification process. So the verification request might be conducted to the importer, to the exporter or producers, to contact point, or to issuing body or competent authority. In case where the verification is addressed to the exporter or producer, the verification request should also be sent to the competent authority. So the importer, exporter, issuing body or competent authority or contact point who receive the verification request would have 30 to 90 days to respond to or to provide the requested information. And if customs in the importing party still needs further verification, they could also undertake the verification visit only after all the verification process to issuing body or competent authority or contact point has been conducted. I think that would be all my presentations. I invite all to raise a question or give a comments, inputs, correction. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Widya. Just a reminder to our participants, if you have any questions, you can just put them in the chat box, or you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you're coming from YouTube, you can just drop your questions or comments in the comment section on your right-hand side. And our next presenter is Mr. Narit Lakmu, Acting Director from Thailand Industrial Standards Institute and former chair of RCEP STRACAP Committee. Mr. Narit will be zooming into RCEP STRACAP chapter, and we'll be looking at how does the RCEP agreement promote harmonization of standards for pharmaceutical and cosmetics products in the RCEP countries. I will hand it over to Mr. Narit now. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you hear me clearly? Firstly, I would like to thank ASEAN Secretariat for inviting a representative from Thai Industrial Standards Institute to give a presentation in this webinar. As a former negotiator for RCEP Chapter 6, Standards, Technical Regulations, and Conformity Assessment Procedure, all called STRACAP in short, I would like to share my view about how the STRACAP chapter promotes harmonization of standards. As you know, the RCEP agreement negotiation started in November 2012 and reached a full conclusion in 2020. Then the virtual signing ceremony was held in November 2020. It took around 1 year for our members to finish their internal process of ratification. Then the agreement entered into force since the 1st of January 2022. I'm not sure whether you have shared my slide presentation. Is everyone can see my slide presentation?
Not yet, sir.
So would you like me to share, or can you please share my presentation?
Just a moment, please.
Okay, I will share just a moment, share my slide presentation. Can you see slide presentation? Okay.
Yes, we can see your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, there are 20 chapters under the RCEP Agreement. You can download the full text from the link or scan QR code below the list of the chapters. And we hope that all chapters under RCEP Agreement can facilitate trade in goods and services and also stimulate the economy of the parties, especially post-COVID-19 pandemic period. For today, I will focus on the provision in STRACAP chapter and share my view on how the chapters promote the harmonization of standards. Okay, the STRACAP chapters negotiation was done by a sub-working group of STRACAP under the Trade in Good working group. The negotiation started in June 2014. It took 18 full negotiation rounds and 4 intersessional rounds before the sub-working group have reached substantial conclusion. Then it was announced during the second RCEP summit in November 2020 that STRACAP chapter concluded. There are 14 articles under the chapters, namely definitions, objectives, scope, affirmation, and probation of the TBT agreement. Then international standards, guides, recommendation, and followed by standards, technical regulation, conformity assessment procedure, cooperation, technical discussions, transparencies, contact points, implementing arrangement, and the last article is dispute settlement. Because the RCEP agreement is the latest free trade agreement that ASEAN made with its 5 partners. Therefore, many provisions in the STRACAP chapters have higher obligation than the previous ASEAN FTA. For the objective of the STRACAP chapter, it aims to facilitate trade by ensuring that standard technical regulation and conformity assessment procedure do not create unnecessary obstacle to trade, enhancing implementation of the TBT agreements. As I said before, most provision in STRACAP chapter have higher obligation than the TBT agreement, or you can call it TBT plus provisions. For example,
Mr. Narib,
yes.
apologies to disturb your presentation, but looks like we are not the screen sharing is not moving. Will it be possible to screen share again?
Already.
Yeah.
Can you see that is changing this slide? If possible, if CN Secretary can share my slide, I think it would be better.
Yes, we will be screen sharing the PPT shortly.
Thank you. I'm sorry for technical problems.
Everyone, apologies on this. Please give us a few minutes. We've got some issues in loading in this presentation. Thank you.
So I will continue in the in slide number 4. By enhancing the implementation of can you go back? Yes. You go to slide number 4, please. Okay. By enhancing the TPT agreement, for example, the STRACAP chapter clearly state the exact time between the publication of technical regulations and their entry into force, and also how to determine the definition of international standard mentioned in Article 2, Article 5, and Annex 3 of the TPT agreements. Promoting the use of a mechanism to facilitate the acceptance of result of conformity assessment procedure. For example, the STRACAP chapter encourage the parties to use the mechanism for such as mutual recognition arrangement and a supplier declaration of conformities to accept the result of conformity assessment procedures in order to facilitate the trade among the parties. And also the next objective is to strengthen information exchange and cooperation amongst the parties. This also include the harmonizing the standards. Next, the addressing issue that may arise under these chapters. And the last objective of STRACAP chapter is to provide a framework to realize this objective of the chapters. In my opinion, there are 7 key provisions to achieve the objective of the STRACAP chapter. Article 6.5 to 6.8, Article 6.10, 6.11, and 6.13. This is the overview of the STRACAP chapter. Next, I would like to focus on how the STRACAP chapter promotes the harmonization of the standards. As I said before, most provision in the STRACAP chapter are TBT plus provisions. And for the harmonization of the standards, it will focus on Article 6.5, international standards, guides, and recommendations. If you look at the paragraph 1 of this article, the key words for the paragraph 1 is to recognize the important role of international standards for harmonizing the technical regulation, conformity assessment procedure standards. This can lead to provision in Article 6.6 standards. The first paragraph is about to ensure that a standardizing body in the parties accepts and comply with Annex 3 of the TBT Agreement, which is the code of good practice for preparation, adoption, and application of the standards. In Annex 3F, the provision provides that standardizing body shall use international standards or relevant part of them as a basis for a standard development. The next paragraph, if we are familiar with the adoption of ISO/IEC standards, this is one of requirements from ISO/IEC Guide 21, that the standardizing body which modify content or structure of an international standard during the adoption of the standards, it have to provide what differences in the content or structure and explain the reason. And the last paragraph of Article 6.6 encourage the parties to have cooperation between the relevant standardizing bodies or bodies. There are many activities that can arrange under the cooperation, and also including the harmonizing national standards. And the following articles, Article 6.7, technical regulation, and 6.8, conformity assessment procedure, the provision extend the use of international standards as a basis for preparation, the technical regulation, and also the conformity assessment procedures. And another article under the STRACAP chapter is Article 6.9, cooperation is encouraged the parties strengthen their cooperation in many matters of mutual interest relating on the standards. So, as I said before, it's quite the same as the paragraph 4 of Article 6.6. The harmonizing standards can be done under these articles. And my last slide is about the Annex 3 of article of the TBT Agreement. Next slide, please. Although the provision of Annex 3 are mainly about the requirement for standard development, some of them aim to encourage the use of international standards as a basis for developing standards. For example, Annex 3G and H encourage national standardizing body to participate in the development of international standards and use them as a basis of national standard as appropriate. This can imply that if the member of the WTO or RCEP harmonize their national standard by identically adopt international standards, it can avoid the duplication of works and also facilitate trade among the parties. And for the work of Pharmaceutical Product Working Group, under ASEAN Consultative Committee for Standard Quality or ACSQ, there are some harmonized technical documents and guidelines developed by the group, such as ASEAN technical requirement for pharmaceutical registration quality and ASEAN guideline for analytical procedures for vaccines. To sum up, the provision in STRACAP chapter under the RCEP Agreement are not the must provision for the parties to harmonize the standard. However, the RCEP Agreement encourages the standardizing body harmonize the standards by using international standard as a basis for development of the national standards. So that is the end of my presentation. If you have any question, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Narit. Our last key presenter for the first session will be Ms. Mary Elizabeth. Ms. Elizabeth is currently the Principal Trade Specialist at the Ministry of Trade and Industry and has covered a range of portfolios over her 25 years in service. She has had extensive involvement in FTA negotiations since 2002, and the last engagement being chair of the RCEP Intellectual Property Working Group. And from March 2020, Ms. Elizabeth has also taken on consultancy role at Singapore Business Federation, guiding SBF on FTA outreach and training for business based in Singapore. The screen is yours, Miss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ani, and good afternoon, or rather good morning to some of you still who are joining our presentation. First of all, like my predecessors have said, RCEP is a mega FTA. I think the thing that you really need to take advantage of is the fact that it is setting a common rule book for a lot of these regulatory issues, and IP is one of them. So what is supposed to happen is that you're supposed to have the common IP level of protection and enforcement throughout all the RCEP countries, with the exception for our Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar colleagues who have been given transitional technical assistance provisions. So what is intellectual property? Just some backdrop, because I know most people are very familiar with the customs related issues, how to move the goods and then the standards. So actually IP is another form of standard. It's not governed by the ISO, but it's governed by the World Intellectual Property Organization, and it protects your ideas, your designs, symbols, names, and images. It is protected in law. For the pharma and cosmetic sector, you will be more familiar with copyright to make sure that your names are not infringed. You also will be familiar with trademarks and how you protect it. For the ingredients that go into making up your products, you would be then familiar with how to protect these composition is via your patents. So for example, SK2, you don't want other companies to be using your same combination and breaching, so that, you know, selling something different, which will dilute your business provisions. So some of them are protecting it in such a tight degree that they protect it via trade secrets. The most famous of all of non-pharmaceutical and cosmetics, which is Coca-Cola, which you do not know what the secret ingredient is, and Kentucky Fried Chicken. But, you know, so if you really think that it's very, very special, you can protect it under trade secrets and not patents. This allows the company, the inventor, to get recognition and to create a monetary benefit. So in Singapore, we now look at it as intangible assets. You are getting your royalties from the use of the IP product and from the sale of the product. So there are two key areas of importance for intellectual property for business. Your revenue from this is supporting investment in innovation and R&D activities. I put here the example of the new phone, but now just as we're emerging from COVID, you have all heard and read and experienced in your own countries how you needed to do intense R&D for all the COVID-related vaccinations and now the medicines that are related to it. And that can only be done because you are earning the revenue back from selling these products. So even though a lot of countries may have been giving the vaccines for free, somebody bought it first. It's either your government bought it or you have a foundation that has bought the product and then is distributing it free. We have very few pharma companies that I am aware of, so I apologize if I'm misspeaking, that have just donated it free, because they are in the business of R&D and innovation, and they need the revenue back to have the means to further improve. So for example, Moderna now has a specific vaccine for Omicron. Others are moving towards a viral drug. So this is just an example in the pharmaceutical sector, which everyone will be familiar with. Brand and related reputation. So earlier on, we already heard about how it is Japan, Korea, especially who have got quite a tight niche on cosmetic products. I mentioned SK2, Laneige is another one, so that's Korea. And then we have other products which are being manufactured in Thailand, for example, a lot of the Procter & Gamble shampoos and everything. So how do you then make sure that as they are being produced and distributed out of Thailand and the rest of ASEAN, that the brand name and reputation is maintained, that you're not having fake shampoo. So this is something that IP also helps you to protect. And then your creativity as you come forward. So this for your various cosmetics. I know that now that we are doing so many things on the web, a few cosmetic companies have come up with foundations that help you look better on the web, you know, so you don't look so white and pasty. So things like that. So how do you keep on doing things like that? Social political is also, as I mentioned before, for the COVID medications, for example, you right holder, the pharma companies needs to make sure that they can have the revenue stream to further improve, but the consumer also needs to be able to have affordable medicines. So how do the governments, how does the agreement come into play? What provisions do we put into place to make sure that there can be affordable medicines as much as possible? I do not think it's so big an issue for cosmetics, because it is cosmetics and well, even for as a female, you won't die if you don't have your cosmetic makeup kit. But if you don't have the medicines, you could. And therefore, governments pay a lot more attention on social political for the pharmaceutical sector. So these are just an overview of the type of IP rights that you have. Patents is for your inventions. Registered design, so it's your cosmetic bottle, your pharma seal cap. All of this can be protected in your designs as well. Geographical indications would not really apply to either of pharmaceutical and cosmetics, because it's like champagne can only be called champagne if it's coming from the region of Champagne in France, and everyone else calls it sparkling wine. So I'm not aware of any cosmetic or pharma product which is falling within this category. It's usually more the wine and spirits, and now food like pharma ham and all the cheeses. For all of you who are doing business with the European Union, you will have a better insight on this. Copyright, again, is yours. So copyright will come how you do your advertisements to promote your cosmetics. That can be copyrighted. You don't need to register it, but you need to make sure that if you hear about it and you can protect it. And then confidential information is like your trade secrets that are coming in that you don't want anybody to get the back end of it and then, steal your ideas and duplicate it. So this is just a quick overview of what has to be registered. What has to be registered, which means that each country needs to have a registration system. So that's why you need to pay attention to it, because what then RCEP and either WIPO agreements do is try to have a common way of registering. In some of the agreements, like in RCEP, we also go a step further. So you can do one-step registration. So if you register, let's say in Singapore, you can also indicate where else in the RCEP region you are going to seek this protection for. And these are some of the conventions that we have adopted. For not to be registered, your company then needs to be more vigilant, because you need to do your own due diligence to make sure that these ideas are not being copied. There's no registration backup for you to just cross-check to see whether somebody is trying to register something which is actually stealing your ideas, which is the benefit that you get from registrable IP rights. So just a quick, the innovation cycle starts with your generation of ideas. So as I said, new ideas, be it in the cosmetics, the shampoo, what are you trying to get? And the pharma, how are you trying to deal with illnesses? How are you trying to protect it? And then what are you creating out of that? And then, so as my first opening remark also noted, you are looking into packaging. Packaging is also an issue that can be IP protected, because you have a unique way. And then when any consumer sees the packaging, even without having to read the word, they know immediately which is the brand behind it. And that also goes to your brand reputation. So the WTO agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property, otherwise known as TRIPS, is the most comprehensive and common agreement that all of us are party to, because we are all WTO members. So it facilitates the trade in knowledge and creativity by protecting your ideas, and also having provisions for enforcement, so that if there's IP theft, what is the basic that you can do to protect your ideas. It is thus the foundation for all IP commitments in our FTAs. As all of us will be aware, especially in these last 10 years, trying to get agreement on anything, anywhere is getting very difficult. We are not really in the let's help each other mindset, but let's help myself mindset. So this, of course, makes it difficult for even the 15 of us in RCEP to have come towards a consensus. But so can you imagine there are 164 members at the WTO to try and get consensus onto any enhanced commitments for IP is very difficult. Even the new issue on how to facilitate access to medicines, which was part of the recent ministerial conference, was also difficult to achieve. So because it's getting more and more difficult to get the common enhancements via TRIPS, we are now moving to get this via your FTA network. And we are aided by this because WIPO treaties have moved ahead, and so we don't not always need to negotiate from scratch, but we can say what has WIPO already done, and then we borrow it, similar to how the standards, you borrow your ISO standards and make it part of an RCEP standard. The same way, we would take a WIPO treaty, put it into the FTA, and then it becomes a binding commitment for all the FTA parties. So as we are doing this, you need to be very clear what is it that we want to protect. IP protection comes with a cost, because the IP right holder wants to make money from it. So that's why just now the socio-economic, how do you make sure that what you are doing does not deter consumers? It is too expensive, or maybe you want to be a luxury cosmetic product that only certain income consumers can afford, and you get your brand and reputation from that way. So these are things to also be aware of when we are trying to see what is it we want to protect. So as I said, just to recap, TRIPS sets the level playing field for all WTO members, which means all RCEP members. The main areas covered are what I already set out just now. And then, is this sufficient? Because it's very basic. It was done and concluded in 1993, before we even had digital, before we had pandemics, before we had a lot of things. So how up to date are the TRIPS protection? So then WIPO treaties can help also to facilitate the registration. For example, the Patent Cooperation Treaty allows you to have multiple registrations just by one, so you can tick which countries you want to do it. The Madrid Protocol for trademarks, the Hague Agreement, all of this helps to facilitate registration and therefore save costs for you as the business, and as well as give you enhanced protection in the countries you have then said that you are going to seek protection for. So FTAs now have become a bigger tool via which to provide all of this IP protection. As usual, it's money makes the world go round. So, in 2014, somehow or other, I cannot get a more later definition, but in 2014 already, it was estimated that 300 billion payment and royalties. If you just think of how much Pfizer has already reportedly made from their COVID vaccine, this is probably triple amount now that your IP royalties can get companies who are protecting their IP in this way. So that's why we need to set minimum standards to make sure that you have your IP protection at a base level within all your FTA partners. And this is what the FTA does. Every country is free to do more. So what the FTA does, what the RCEP Chapter is, sets the baseline so that businesses can accept at least this minimum protection and recourse to IP when you're doing your business within the RCEP region. So the key benefits, again, is TRIPS plus IP protection in trademarks, trade secrets, copyright, patents, and enforcement. And this is done by enhancing the level of protection, provides clarity on how it's going to be registered. We identify the treaties, and then most importantly, especially for this region, because so far, even in the ASEAN Working Group on Intellectual Property and the ASEAN +1 discussion so far, we have not really agreed to any clear enforcement. So RCEP is the first time that we now have common enforcement mechanisms to protect your IP rights. So as I said, we are dealing with non-traditional trademarks, both in sound and sense. So, for those of you in the cosmetic side who have a scent alluded to with your product, be it like, a certain scent for your shampoo, all can be protected now. You are also having the Nokia ringtones, whatever advertisement. So this is, trademarks is beyond just your logo. It goes much further now. And then in the digital environment, so I think for your sector, it's more about as you do your advertisements, as you promote your product, so how do you get your copyright protection that others don't steal your ideas? And then we deal with border measures as well. So, as the goods are moving, you don't want the fake drugs, the fake cosmetics. It's not just the Louis Vuitton bags, but other things also that you have a trademark protection. You can also protect across the border. And then, as I said, we have facilitated how you can protect your IP by electronic registration, and most importantly, a lot of improved transparency so that if you're a business, you can check to see whether an idea you have has already been registered by someone else, or whether you are going to be the first one to register the idea, and that helps you a bit of heartache as you go along the business. The more important thing for RCEP that people should be aware of, especially in the cosmetic sector, is what we call GRTK, Genetic Resources and Traditional Knowledge. This is like, for example, your cosmetic companies where you are taking provisions from nature to develop your cosmetics, either your flowers, your trees, whatever it is. GRTK provisions in RCEP now requires you to check as to whether how much disclosure do you need to do. It doesn't prevent you from using the flowers and the biodiversity, but a lot of countries now are trying to protect their biodiversity, especially in ASEAN. We have Indonesia, Thailand, all being very strong in this area. And then we have also Japan and Korea who have got a middle ground. So you need to notify, and then they are coming up with a register so you know how the biodiversity is being protected. So this is something I encourage cosmetic companies, especially, including pharmaceuticals, because you know turmeric is a natural herb which now is found in so many medicines. So do you need to disclose? What sort of disclosure do you need when you're using these natural things in your pharmaceutical products, in your cosmetic products? Because there was so much divided views on how to protect your biodiversity via GRTK provisions, we don't really have a common basis in RCEP, but we have taken the first step to say you must check to see how each country may require additional disclosure requirements, and that's as far as we have gone. We have not moved ahead to say, like in the Convention of Biological Diversity, that you might need to get a pre-approval consent, because different countries are wanting to do it differently. Some countries, for example, my own country, Singapore, we have been encouraging a lot of R&D in this area. So we want to facilitate the companies who are doing the R&D then to protect their product via patents. And so we don't really need to see a first approval from our natural parks division, which is looking after Singapore's biodiversity, but we at least are now moving towards you need to inform. So I encourage all of you all to please check with your IP lawyers when you are trying to patent your innovation to see what is the GRTK provision that you would need in the country that you're seeking to do the innovation, the sale, the distribution, and especially where you're sourcing the ingredients from. And then we also have a provision for farmers, again, not so much for your sector, but this slide is just to show you how RCEP has been quite unique in that we are not just about how to protect wealth. You know, IP is always seen as a rich man's protection, always the companies are, you know. So RCEP has taken a leaf in trying to have this socio-economic backdrop. And so we look into areas in which we either protecting your own biodiversity to make sure that farmers are not being given hidden costs when they buy seeds. And we also have transition and technical assistance provisions. So just a snapshot now. Our IP, as you know, is very technical, so I'm not going to go in too much detail because that would take a few hours. So, you know, so this is what we already have, Paris-Bern in TRIPS, so it protects your trademarks and all that. Patent Cooperation Treaty allows you to do the one-stop registration. Madrid also enhances your trademark protection. The Copyright Treaty and Performance is for those of you who, I think in this area applies more to those of you who are doing your advertisements and promotion. For other sectors, to be your artists, your Netflix films and things like that, how are you protecting it? And then, as I said, isn't it RCEP, we're trying to look out for each other. So we also have, how do you help the blind access a lot of this? So that means how do you then lower down the royalties that you must pay? How do you help the blind get access to a lot of these literature and documents and access, so you don't, you know, keep them out of the system? So the Budapest Treaty for RCEP is shall endeavor. Budapest is looking on microorganisms, you know, protection. And then UPOV, as I said, is the patent for plant seed varieties, which, because ASEAN especially has a lot of poorer farmers, we were not willing to accept a provision that might increase costs for the farmers as they buy the seeds and everything. So we only leave it to each party to decide whether they're going to have anything. And if they are going to and thinking about it, then how they can get assistance from other RCEP parties who may have already adopted it, like Japan, like Singapore. And then Singapore treaties and conventions, and then Hague and Rome are on design. So, you know, you can see we are looking at things a bit more differently, always with a view to make sure that cost is more affordable, because as I said, once you start getting royalties and IP protection, products become a bit more expensive. And that's also why in RCEP, we have no additional patent protection for pharmaceutical sector, nothing for biologics and everything, which, you know, in TPP, the US had been pushing for, because we all saw it as it will only make healthcare more expensive. And with Thailand and India and all who are in RCEP providing a lot of affordable care, especially for HIV patients and all that, to have provided the enhanced patent protection for pharmaceuticals could have defeated this overarching objective to help the poor have proper access and medical care if you are suffering from any of these diseases. So IP is very technical. So as I said, it's divided into 83 articles. I've highlighted in red here the chapters which will be of interest to both the pharma and the cosmetic sectors. So you can look into these chapters with either yourself in-house or with the assistance of an IP lawyer, because it is very technical. And most importantly then is enforcement. As I said, it's the first time that we have common enforcement principles for all 15 of us. So this is something, as you know, people always talk very loosely about IP theft. Please look into the enforcement provisions to make sure that you have the system in place for your own company on how you're going to protect your IP by enforcing your IP rights. I'll stop here because it, as I said, is rather technical, and my aim was just to give you a flavor of how RCEP helps you in your sectors. Happy to answer any questions later during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Liz. Now we are coming to the second session for today, a panel discussion session, and I will hand it over to our moderator, Ms. Presti from ESEC AERT. Thank you.
Division, Tabiats and Secretariat. Our key speakers have presented interesting data and information regarding pharmacy and cosmetics industry and its linkages to RCEP agreement. And we understand that some of the key highlights are the importance of IP and standards and conformance and technical regulations in the pharmacy and cosmetics industry, and how to balance this IP and STRACAP with the facilitating the trade of those products in the RCEP participating countries. So today, our panel discussion session will also include the Q&A sessions, which involves all the presenters and panelists. So together, we will try to look into the utilization of the RCEP in the pharmaceutical and cosmetics industry and its relation to this to the businesses and the companies. So firstly, I would like to introduce our discussion today. We have Dr. Swee Kheng Khor. He is the chair of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council Healthcare Working Group. And we had our second panelist, Ms. Ban Myung Suk, but unfortunately, due to the sudden urgent matters, she couldn't be able to sit here with us. So as mentioned earlier, we will also get all the presenters to take part in attempting to answer some questions related to today's webinar theme. For this session, I will throw some questions, and anyone who has thoughts and opinions can just simply jump in and answer the questions for around 5 to 7 minutes. So Ms. Liz, Widya, Mr. Narit, and Dr. Ko, you can share your opinions for the questions. Now for the first question, you understand that with the entry into force of RCEP agreement on the 1st of January 2022, it connects ASEAN and some of major global economies such as China, Korea, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and it covers 30% of the world's population, global GDP, and a quarter of global trade in goods and services. So it's been 6 months since RCEP agreement has entered into force, and we are keen to understand how is the utilization of the agreement so far. And for this, I'd like to understand maybe from Dr. Hor, would you be able to share if companies, especially those in the working group on your associations, whether they have discussed or even make use of the agreement? If they have, what are the benefits that the companies view as the incentives to use the agreement? And if not, what are the challenges in doing so?
Thank you, Presti. Great question. I'd like to answer your question narrowly and then move on to perhaps discussing about the regulatory and the registration and the reimbursement processes for healthcare products. Yeah. So your question is regarding the ASEAN Business Advisory Council's healthcare working group and whether or not the member organizations have been using RCEP. The short answer is yes, but not enough. Yes, because RCEP is already here and we need to be very mindful about the provisions for intellectual property, rules of origin, and also generally the trade barriers, or rather the reduction in trade barriers between countries. So yes, member organizations inside the Business Advisory Council are aware. I'm only focused on healthcare quite narrowly. There are many other portions of the business world that I'm not familiar with, right? Things like entertainment, music, just general trade. So let me focus my comments on healthcare. Generally speaking, RCEP and healthcare, RCEP has an impact on healthcare. And I think generally speaking, the healthcare companies, if we can divide them into pharmaceuticals, medical devices, cosmetics, and healthcare groups, right, are the four major players in healthcare. They're aware of RCEP, but they haven't really utilized its provisions and haven't really incorporated RCEP into their public policy, regulatory strategy, and even a commercial strategy as well. Partially, that's because a lot of the conversations surrounding intellectual property are I won't say not relevant to them, but they have these companies that are operating in Southeast Asia have got corporate functions based in Japan or Europe or America that are more well-versed with these mega trade deals, and therefore a lot of these functions are outsourced out to the corporate sector, to the corporate functions, as opposed to being on the ground in Singapore or Bangkok or Manila. So that's my short answer of yes, but not enough. Let me move away from that a little bit, right? To say that narrowly for health products, and I use health products as an umbrella term to describe pharmaceuticals, vaccines, medical devices, and consumables. This represents, generally speaking, about 10% 10 to 20% of all healthcare spending, because the other 80% of healthcare spending is actually in services, salaries for doctors and things like that. So the devices, equipments, consumables, and health products are about 10 to 20% of healthcare spending, generally across different countries. Now, that has got the commercial strategies for these countries are less related to RCEP and more related to two elements which are not really covered by RCEP, which is number one, product registration. And in Southeast Asia, it's still very fragmented, as in, let's just take a ventilator, right? So you use a ventilator in an intensive care unit, regardless of the rules of origin, really. If you register the ventilator in Thailand, you're not automatically registered in Philippines. And if you're registering even gloves, right? Just surgical gloves registered in Indonesia, they're not automatically registered in Vietnam. That's a registration problem. And at the moment, Southeast Asia doesn't yet have meaningful regulatory convergence, although ASEAN regulators and university groups are trying to achieve this regulatory convergence. The second challenge after registration, and I'll end on this note, Presti, is the challenge of reimbursement. About 47 to 50% of all healthcare spending in Southeast Asia is government, and another 20 to 30% is insurance. So in total, out-of-pocket payments in healthcare, meaning a patient, the consumer, pays for healthcare out of their own pocket, is approximately maybe 20 to 40%. The remaining 60 to 80% is paid for by governments, for example, Ministry of Health Malaysia, or a private, not a private, I apologize, but a government-owned insurance fund like PhilHealth in the Philippines, or the 3 national health schemes in Thailand, or JKN, or Jaminan Kesihatan Nasional in Indonesia. And those are large payers that shall we say, have restrictions on what they can reimburse. And that's the second element that pharma companies and medical devices companies are very focused on. Firstly, registration. Secondly, reimbursement. And because they're so focused on registration and reimbursement, there's not much space for them to think about RCEP too much. Also because RCEP and intellectual property and rules of origin is a global corporate function as opposed to a local pharmaceutical function, for example. I'll pause my comments over here, Presti. With my apologies, I'll have to leave the Zoom webinar right now, but over again to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kaur. It's very insightful that we understand now that yes, the healthcare companies are aware of the RCEP, but they are not yet fully implemented, particularly in their public policy. So, and the two main problems are because they're less related to RCEP, but more to the two things, which are product registration and reimbursement. So, yeah, it's because RCEP is more of the global corporate functions, and these sectors, they are focusing more on the local corporate functions, which relates to this product registration and reimbursement. And is there anyone who would like to add some points on this? Okay, we can continue to the next question. So we understand that pharmaceutical companies in Southeast Asia have enjoyed high growth in the region, and beauty industry is among the categories leading development in Southeast Asia. So we'd like to understand, how do you see the entry into force of RCEP would impact the region as the supplier of pharmaceutical and cosmetics products? Maybe Dr. Kaur, and then we can continue to Ms. Liz.
Presti, thank you. This is a question from David in the Q&A, right? Thank you. David, thank you for your question. The short answer is no, there is no common RCEP agreement for registering these kind of products. However, there are some ASEAN initiatives that date back to, well, sometimes even 10 to 12 years. Implementation is challenging for natural reasons, because the ASEAN Secretariat is not set up to coordinate these things, and really the regulators need to come together. So because of the very different, say, sophistications of the regulators in country, I might not be able to give you a very comprehensive piece of information, but we can always have a side conversation. Let me leave you, David, with two search terms that you can use to look at, say, what ASEAN has done. The first search term is something called the Medical Device Directive. The Medical Device Directive is from 2016, and is an ASEAN initiative to try to harmonize, that is the word, harmonize, but not converge, harmonize the regulatory standards for medical devices across Southeast Asia. So it's one example of how ASEAN is leading regulators to try to harmonize their procedures to regulate these devices. So that's one thing I might ask you to look at, David. David, the second thing I might suggest for you to look at is the different levels of maturity of a regulator. The technical term is levels of maturity. The World Health Organization, which is a standards sector, helps to stratify countries by the levels of maturity. So the higher the level of maturity of a country's regulator, it means that the more stringent, more capable the regulators are in assessing a product. So the second thing you can look at is the levels of maturity of the different regulators in Southeast Asia. There is one example, maybe a third one that we can look at, very fun example for us to think about how to integrate, harmonize, converge Southeast Asia a little bit more, is a very close relationship between the Bruneian regulator and the Singaporean regulator. So the Brunei MOH follows quite closely, I can't say quite closely, I'm sorry, but they're quite well aligned, shall we say, between the Bruneian regulator and the Health Sciences Authority in Singapore. That's one example of a very good bilateral relationship. And we hope that more of these bilateral relationships will coalesce into a multilateral relationship in Southeast Asia. That's my color commentary, David. Your question is a great one. A short answer is no, there's no common RCEP. There's a patchwork of tools. Implementation is challenging, and I've given the concept of the levels of maturity for us to understand how challenging it might be. Also, the Brunei-Singapore special relationship. Thank you, David, and over to you, Presti.
Thank you, Dr. Kaur. Maybe you can hear something from Ms. Liz.
Thank you very much, Presti, and thank you, David, for your question. It is indeed one of those areas that, as Dr. Kaur said, is very challenging because we have different ways of protecting different interests within the ASEAN countries, within the RCEP countries. It's very similar, if you don't mind the comparison, as to how we all have differing standards as to how we protect food safety. So, all of this is also linked more to health safety, and then we all have different standards, different needs, different requirements. And also, you cannot run away from the fact that some are protecting their homegrown more so and making it very difficult for foreign to come in, and therefore they use all sorts of ways to do so. But all is not lost, you're aware of this. And so RCEP, I would say, as I pointed out, for IP, so at least you can register your IP, your trademark, your patents for all of these products amongst all the RCEP countries. And that will help and facilitate you getting your IP protection. Then you also have enforcement. RCEP also, because it's a living agreement, maybe not so soon now because it's only 6 months into entry into force, and not all 15 are part of RCEP as yet. And some of us are still hoping India comes back to the table. But when the RCEP starts its overview, preparing for reviews, the working group starts all their work, we have what we call built-in agenda provisions. So standards is one of them. Some of these issues also can be brought up. They have provisions on how you look into addressing non-tariff measures, and what you have brought up is a non-tariff measure that, makes it difficult. I would say now, because of supply chain disruption and all that, despite the fact that a lot of this in the cosmetics and IP side, we are always very traditionally looking at what comes from overseas. This might also be an opportunity to start to raise the brand and the awareness of our own local products, and how to get more consumers to be aware, how to protect the brand, how to raise your awareness, so that if there's a supply chain disruption, hopefully we will not be disrupted so badly because you are sourcing ingredients, goods, and products from your neighborhood, rather than having to wait for a ship to come all the way and it may be blocked and all sorts of things, So I think that is what RCEP really does. It helps businesses re-look at how they are doing their strategies, because it provides this common rule book or the potential for a lot more common regulatory issues to be addressed. As a former negotiator, I will just tell you that we try to address what businesses raise. I cannot read your mind. So you need to find a channel via which to raise all this, whether it's by the ASEAN back or something, to raise it back to the negotiators. And this is not just at the RCEP meetings, but work with your own domestic teams as well, so that we can then see how best to strengthen and enforce the RCEP region. That RCEP is just the first step into its establishing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Liz and Dr. Kaur, who has another agenda and lead us for the time being. So from the answers, we can understand that the implementation of this RCEP agreement is another level of challenge after the entry into force of the agreement. And Dr. Kaur has mentioned that the different sophistication of regulations in the countries, and also two main things, which are the medical device directives, which has the role to harmonize the regulatory standards in the Southeast Asia. And the other one is the different levels of maturity of the regulations, which creates a challenge where there are different regulations implemented in the different country, which some regulations are more mature than the other one. That would create another issue. And from Ms. Liz, we understand that the cosmetics and IP is closely related, as there are more brands coming from international. We can expect this RCEP agreement to help enhance the supply chain within these RCEP participating countries, because companies can source their products from the neighboring countries, and that they can also implement this, register their intellectual property rights. So there are regulations, but the implementation is another thing. And we are moving to the next question. So the next one, it's regarding the utilization of the RCEP agreement. We would like to understand from customs perspectives, what are usually the difficulties faced by the pharmaceuticals and cosmetics industry, the pharmacy and cosmetics companies, when it comes to the customs or sourcing materials of their products? Is there any features in RCEP agreement that could tackle some of those challenges? Maybe Pak Widya could have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is from customs perspective. Yeah, so the speaking about the importation of materials that will be used to produce pharmaceutical and cosmetic products, in general, we have to check the import license. So the import license of the imported materials is usually I don't know, maybe the biggest problem for the importers to produce it to customs, because for the big producers, maybe they are already aware about the import license, and so before the coming of the goods, they already go to the related government institutions to issue the import license. Concerning the rules of origin, maybe when the materials is accumulated from various parties, maybe from customs perspective, we have a very big challenges in tracing the documentation to prove that the good is originating from the parties. I'm not sure if I answer your questions correctly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak. So we now we learned that one of the challenges in customs is in tracing the documentation to prove whether the goods is originating from the RCEP participating countries. So, Pak, we'd like to learn more. What are usually the difficulties faced by pharmacy and cosmetics companies when it comes to customs?
Well, I'm not very intensely communicate with the pharmacy and cosmetic industry, and maybe I'm not very aware about their difficulties. But as long as when I work as the verificator in the port, I think the biggest challenge for the pharmacy industry is about the import license. Maybe that's all I know so far. If maybe other speaker could give me other clues, maybe I can add something more later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Widya. So import licensing is one of the challenges faced by the pharmacy and cosmetics company. Would you like something to add, Ms. Liz or Mr. Narit?
I would just share that, it depends also where you're sourcing and what sort of origin criteria you are and trying to work under. And I think this applies for all sectors. It could be because we were hearing just now that a lot of these pharma and medical devices and cosmetics, a lot of it is, the headquarters is not in ASEAN. And so it depends then where you're sourcing and how you are manufacturing the ingredients that are going into your product, and how then does the ROO complement this, or do you still have difficulties? I know not so much from speaking to pharma or cosmetic sectors, because they seldom raise any problems when I was doing negotiations. So that's apart from import licensing, of course, which is, and the registration issues. But in terms of rules of origin, I'm not sure whether they are more comfortable with RVC still. Do they still have high enough profits that, they're very comfortable to meet that, or whether they are preferring a process rule, or whether they are, so it's things like that, which I think they need to know where the supply chain sourcing is. And then that could be a customs issue. Otherwise, I agree with Mr. Vidya, is import licensing, because so many of these products are controlled goods for which you cannot just import freely. So that is the thing that companies must check. And I think in RCEP, we have more transparency provisions as to how these are then being implemented. These may then help the companies to know what is the import licensing requirements and how to deal with this, and therefore give customs less headaches when they're trying to clear the goods.
Thank you, Ms. Liz. So yeah, it's the import licensing is one of the challenge, because controlled goods, because it relates to the controlled goods and the different requirements that applies to these goods, that makes it more challenging for the customs to deal with these products. Yeah, so we're moving to the next question. Now, pharma and cosmetics industry are closely linked with industrial standards and intellectual property rights. And the RCEP agreement has this specific chapter on STRACAP and the intellectual property. As we all know, the different standards and technical regulations and conformity assessment procedure among the countries usually creates certain challenges for trade among these countries. It is important to implement the standards and technical regulations to ensure the quality of the products, but it is equally important to facilitate trade of those products among the countries. So striking the balance between these products quality and the commercial role. Now, we'd like to learn how will the provision on IP and STRACAP in the RCEP agreement can help facilitate trade of pharmacy and cosmetics products in the region and beyond. Maybe Mr. Narit can share some thoughts and then continue with Ms. Liz. Ms. Liz?
Thank you very much for the question. In my opinion, the STRACAP chapter does not require that all parties have to harmonize the standards and use the same standards, but it's encouraged to the parties or harmonize the standard together. But for the technical regulation, it will be better if we can use the same regulation as a basis. for action. And also, if the sector also harmonize the control assessment procedures, because the basis of STRACAP chapter is the TPT agreement, and it stated in the agreement that if possible, we should use international standards as a basis for those three elements. This is it has been emphasized that it's important for facilitating trade on the parties. And in the STRACAP chapter, they are also have the article about the transparencies and technical discussion for the party to discuss and have the cooperation to how to help each other to reduce technical barrier to trade. I think it's, if we can balance between the regulations and the standards by using international standards, I think it will help the parties to solve the problem that arise by the thing of the different nations.
Maybe then I'll add from the IP perspective, what the RCEP IP chapter does is that it encourages innovation, research and development because your IP will be protected. It also then will save costs as you register your IP because we are adopting the WIPO treaties that encourage that. And then, as I said, because it's the first time that you have common enforcement, hopefully this will encourage more IP, R&D, innovation, and all to take place in the RCEP region because then you can enforce any IP theft. So hopefully from the RCEP agreement, we will see this region, and there's so much of it already happening in individual countries that we will see maybe a greater flow of RCEP-made innovation products and all that because the RCEP chapter gives you this additional comfort level. But at the end of the day, it's up to businesses to check and do their assessment, how they want to protect their IP rights. Sometimes you might think that the registration cost is expensive, but I think if you think how you're protecting the IP against theft and how it will help you enforce it, it might be worth the initial high cost in seeking registration in multiple RCEP territories, which the IP chapter now allows you to do a bit more simply and efficiently. And there's also transparency. In fact, as I said, most of the RCEP chapters now have stronger transparency provisions. It's now up to how each RCEP member reflects this transparency back to business, so business will know how to tap on it as they make their business decisions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Narit and Ms. Liz. So from Mr. Narit, we understand that this RCEP agreement, it says that for parties to, if possible, to use the international standards. And the use of these international standards would help to harmonize the regulation and further facilitate the trade among these countries. And that is one of the features of RCEP, which to facilitate the trade among these parties. And then from Ms. Liz, we understand that the RCEP agreement encourages innovations because it allows the companies who are using this agreement to register their IP for the products they export. And RCEP also gives the feature of cost saving because they're adopting the WIPO treaties, and there is also this common enforcement. So all these packages, it encourages it gives a greater flow of innovative products among these RCEP participating countries. So thank you for this insightful information. And we will see from the Q&A box whether we have questions. Okay, so we have no more questions. And we have reached to the end of the discussion and Q&A sessions. I would like to thank all the key speakers and panelists for joining us in this webinar. Pak Widya for the perspectives from customs, Mr. Narif for your views on industrial standards, and Ms. Liz for the point of view from the intellectual property, and lastly, Dr. Kaur for the perspective from the business. So that marks the end of our webinar today. I'd like to thank the organizers, the ASEAN Secretariat and East Asia Business Council, also all the key speakers and discussants and participants for taking the time to join this webinar. So I'll see you next time.
Thank you to the organizers and to everyone for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to see you all.